Welcome to Just Thinking. This is Mary Greendale. The title of this show grew out of a lifetime of curiosity about many different subjects. Some local, some global, and some in between. For each show, I will open with my thoughts and then bring on guests who explore the subject in greater detail. I hope the show inspires healthy discussions on camera and among viewers. To me, the sky's the limit when we are just thinking. Hi, welcome to Just Thinking. Today, we're in my kitchen. Not really, but this is what it feels like. To me, anyway. I have Deborah Sweet here with me today, and we're going to talk about family and fostering children, literally fostering children, being a foster parent. And it feels a little sterile to have this conversation in a studio, so we're both going to be pretending that we're in my kitchen and we have coffee instead of water and these aren't cameras. But at any rate, I've wanted to have Deb on for quite a while because I've known her for a few years and I know that she's extremely committed to being a foster parent and has a fairly lengthy history, and I think a lot to tell us about what that experience is like, why she does it, and maybe why some of us should be thinking about doing it. So, Deborah Sweet, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
It's my pleasure, really. We have talked about this for a while.
We have.
But at any rate, before we start talking about fostering, let's talk about you. How did you, who are you? What do you do in real life? Do you work outside your home besides taking care of kids?
Yes, to all of that.
Okay.
So who am I? I'm an art teacher by trade, so I taught at Placentino for 11 years, off and on, with small stints off when I was having my own children. We have 3 biological children. My oldest is going to college this year. We're sending him off in a week. And I have 2 adopted children. So backing up a little bit, when I was teaching, actually long before I was teaching, when I was in art school, I was a home health aide, and I would be assigned cases to go into other people's homes and help with the care of their children, particularly those with special needs. And I fell in love with one of the placements that I had at the time. I was placed in a medical foster home, and the woman that I worked with had upwards of 9 or 10 kids. Most of them had heavy medical diagnoses, but sometimes we would just get a baby who was detoxing from drugs and needed foster care throughout that process. And the lighter cases, the less medical cases, the more behavioral or drug-addicted kids, which, by the way, the vast majority of foster kids are born into drug addiction. They would be my charges, so I would take care of those children. And so I'm putting myself through college, and I'm on these myriad of cases, and one of them being this foster home. And I just can't stop thinking about how this is what I want to do when I grow up. I was 19 at the time. I stayed in that home for years, right through having my first and second child. I worked there on weekends. We would go on Thanksgiving. I met my husband while I was there. He would come with me on Thanksgiving when all the other nurses would, be home with their families, and we would start the day there. And we just loved being in that environment. So fast forwarding to our own family, I was teaching. My husband is a pediatric nurse practitioner. His kids are all complex medical kids, and he case manages those children and works a myriad of jobs, and one of his positions at Spalding Rehab introduced him to a little baby who was basically living on the hospital floor. She had a traumatic brain injury and some other serious medical issues, and didn't have a place to go because there wasn't a foster home available to take care of her needs. And my husband, who rarely brought home his patients, kept talking about this one little girl. And one particular Saturday morning, we were in the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru right here in Holliston, and he mentioned her one more time, and I looked at him and I said, "What are we waiting for?" So we had some, our own challenges in our family. We had some special needs with some of our own children, and we used to talk about how we were in the trenches. And I said to him, we thought we'd wait and do this when we are out of the trenches. That didn't really seem to make sense. It made more sense to us to be deep down in there with our own kids, rather than climbing our way out and getting a breath of fresh air, relaxing a little, and then taking another nosedive into another trench. So we decided to speed up the process. We called the social worker while we were in the drive-through line, left a message for her, and asked her how to get started. And that landed us in MAP training, which is the Massachusetts approach to partnership in parenting. And that's the course you take if you want to be a DCF foster parent. And throughout that course, we kind of waited. It's 10 weeks long, and we waited to hear about this little girl and hear how she was doing. And she actually was placed with an aunt throughout the process of our training. And so we were at the crossroads. Do we stay this course, or do we stop and pause and wait until, another little person comes along, or until our life is just a little bit easier? And we decided that really it's not about the mass population of foster children out there, which is 7,000 to 9,000 at any given moment in our state. Mm-hmm. It's about one child. So we finished the course. Before the ink was dry on our license, we had a baby in our arms. And we just saw that case through. We just saw that child through to where he didn't need us anymore. And then we've done this now for 10 years. Then we made a decision. Do we stay or do we stop? Do we pause? And throughout the last decade, we have kind of played that game with between my husband and myself and my family. Just how much further do we go? And it's so interesting watching my kids grow up through this process, because we've told them all along, we're in the driver's seat, but you all have a firm foot on the brakes. So you let us know. And we value their opinion and their input, and for 10 years they have never said stop. It's usually my husband and I that say,
we need a break.
We know our family needs an emotional break, if not just a physical break. We take in a lot of babies, so sometimes it's just a matter of I need to sleep at night for a little while before I get up and do a 16, 17, 18, 20-hour day, whatever it is. So, I mean, that's sort of the big picture of how we all began on this journey. A lot of people think it's just me, that my husband is just following along, and I will tell you, it is not just me.
Yeah, I would find it hard to believe. That was going to be one of my questions, because it has to be remarkably time and labor intensive. So it's got to take the two of you.
It is a life commitment.
Yeah.
So even if we closed our doors to children right now in this moment, we have committed 10 years of our life, and we have changed the makeup and the course that our family was on by deciding to do this for other people's children. So it's nothing I could have done on my own. I don't think we'd still be married if this was just about me. It has to be about not only the two of us, but about our entire family and how this works for all of us together as a solid unit. And I think we've learned that the most through some of the grief we've gone through. This is sort of a controlled way to allow our children to experience loss and grief and learn how we process grief as a family, as individuals, how we hold each other up, how we bring each other through. There's almost no other comparable experience in the world that I can imagine where you do have some semblance of control over how your children experience loss. And it's something that's unavoidable in this life. So, there's so much joy and happiness, and there are so many wonderful things we can talk about as well. But I think everyone really just wants to know how we say goodbye and how we process all the loss. And I have to say that there are 1,000,003 things that happen that are full of grief and hardship and frustration and fear before we ever say goodbye to these kids. I mean, the road is always bumpy. These are not cut and dry cases. These are people's lives. These are the lives of birth parents, and they're complicated and messy and dirty and not always bad, most often just heartbreaking. It's just this cycle that just keeps repeating itself. And I see it as I raise my own children. I raise my a child I have adopted who has a lot of trauma in his history, and that plays out a lot in our family. And I see what trauma does to your brain. And I know that for so many of the kids that we've cared for, the brains of their birth parents have been affected similarly, and that it's not just about making good choices. It's sometimes just not having the ability to make the good choices and the support to make the good choices. So it's just such a messy, complicated picture. But at the end of the day, it's about the one child or the two children that we're helping, not about the 500,000 across the country that need
well,
help.
I think if you focused on that, obviously, it would discourage you so
It is.
much.
It's
you'd
a
have to
deterrent.
leave. Yeah. So now at home right now, what do you have for an array? What's your population like?
My population is big. It's busy. So my oldest just graduated high school, and I have a daughter going into her sophomore year, a son going into 7th grade, another son going into 4th grade, and my little one is going into 1st. We have an open slot. The state allows us to have 6 children under, actually, I guess technically my son just turned 18. We have 2 open slots.
Oh.
That doesn't mean that we need to be full all the time, and it doesn't mean that it's reasonable to be full all the time, but we always have another place at the table, to quote one of my favorite books on foster parenting. We do. We always have a pack and play in our bedroom, and we are just waiting. We're waiting for phone calls. We took a little break this summer to get my son ready for college. We try to make those pauses reasonable and realistic for our family so that we're not always expecting a phone call. But we've done a lot of respite care, which means we're helping other foster families for cut and dry periods of time, this day to that
for a
day.
weekend or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've certainly had babies throughout the summer, but it hasn't been the magnitude of emotions, the wishing we had a crystal ball kind of baby, like what's gonna be, when's it gonna end, when's it not gonna end, can they stay forever, are they not staying for, it's just all the back and forth, the roller coaster ride of foster parenting that is so challenging. So that we've taken a break from for the summer, so we can kind of get our bearings and figure out what life would be like without my oldest at home.
I'm assuming that Zach, the oldest at home, is a pretty big help in some of this, just in terms of entertaining somebody that's younger, or grabbing a kid or whatever.
Yeah, one of the most exciting parts of this entire journey has been watching my 3 older biological kids grow up and become helpers.
That's good.
So it used to be me and 5 or 6 kids, and my responsibility was high for each and every one of them. And now it's sort of me plus my husband when he's home plus 3 big kids who are incredibly helpful, empathetic beings, and then the 2 little ones that we have all the time. And whatever baby comes through, I barely get to hold anymore because they just want full access to. They love, my children have been around babies their whole life, and they just love being around them.
The little infants.
Yeah.
I bumped into you one day at Coffee Haven, and you had an infant with you, and I'm assuming another foster parent, maybe she lives here or not, but she also had a baby, an infant with her. And I wanted to ask you then, but it was a little embarrassing to do that. I just wanted to know, what do you have to deal with when you have an addicted child? When here you have this infant that's coming off of whatever mom's been on.
Right.
What is it that you face?
Where to begin? Well, behaviors, first of all. Typically, children who are withdrawing from whatever mom has been on throughout the pregnancy, particularly in the last few weeks of pregnancy before they were born, is an irritable, cranky, ravenous, upset baby that needs to be held and swaddled but sweats profusely because they're getting rid of these toxins from their body. So you're swaddling them to comfort them emotionally, and then physically they're uncomfortable being swaddled. So there's just almost never a right place to put them in. They want to be held all the time, but then they don't want to be held. The irritability is so high. If you've ever watched an adult coming off of drugs and detoxing from drugs, and you see them throwing up and getting the cold sweats and just feeling like their entire body is fighting against them. That's what it's like to watch a newborn or an infant go through the same withdrawal. So it's a tough few months. Now every baby handles it differently. Both of our adopted kids were addicted when they came, and both of them were different. And through all the foster children we've had, I can't quote 2 that were the same, but there are similarities along the road. And I think the thing that is most troubling to me is that we haven't caught up with what happens to these babies from a medical, emotional, behavioral, educational standpoint. So it's like we're not all talking about the same thing. Everyone sort of has their place in how to treat, but it seems like nobody's talking together about how to treat these kids. For instance, if a child has neonatal abstinence syndrome, it means that they were born addicted and they had to withdraw from the drugs. Sometimes they're given other drugs to help them withdraw. Sometimes they don't need those. And a lot of times what happens is you have several months of that behavior I just described, and then all of a sudden they start to feel better and they get better. And so by contrast, they look like they have completely evolved into this developmentally appropriate, milestone-needing child. But in reality, I think a lot of times it's just the stark contrast between the two. And there's this sort of lull where you're just so excited that they're happy and they're sleeping and they're smiling and that they feel better, that you can get lost in that. And then as these children get older, all of a sudden milestones really aren't being met. And we lose them because early intervention comes in maybe at the beginning, especially if the kid is coming into foster care. And they meet the criteria pretty quickly generally. But then all of a sudden these kids are kind of passing the tests and early intervention might need to go away because they're not meeting the criteria anymore. But the kids aren't out of the woods yet. I mean, depending on what drugs were taken, the amount of drugs that were taken, what part of brain development these children were in utero, whether the parent was attached in utero to the child or not attached, it all makes a difference in the kind of little person and the brain that develops in this little person. And sadly, a lot of times they kind of get dropped off the radar because they start to meet milestones and then they start to fall again. And then it's like, the scramble to pick up. And at that point, are they even still with the foster parent they started with? Is it a new set of eyes looking at them, not knowing where they were from the beginning? Is the system loses them to some degree. And I don't just mean the foster care system. I mean, the medical system and the early intervention and the school system. It's like there isn't enough continuity of care to keep these kids afloat. So there has been some push in legislature to start looking at how we can make sure these kids stay under the radar of all these agencies that are there to help and to look at them. Just being born addicted should kind of keep them under the radar until they're at least 3 years old. And then the school system can pick them up. And then there's, a partnership between early intervention and the school system.
Right.
So that's an exciting new development that I've been hearing a little bit about. I've been a little bit of asked to talk a little bit about recently. And I'm hopeful that will help be more of a safety net for these kids. And because ultimately what we really want is to produce kind, caring, productive, capable adults, right? So to do that, we have to be looking at them every step of the way.
Yeah, I guess you just can't assume that it's all going to fall into place. It probably can't fall into place. It probably just can't.
Right.
Which is sort of a discouraging thought as I think about it, that you bring them through the nurturing of the first few months and so forth, and now you probably want them to be normal. And when they start to look normal, your own, hopes kind of get right in there. And
you celebrate every milestone, right?
Lull you into, they're going to be perfectly fine. This kid's going to be great and so forth, but not necessarily.
Right. And like I said, they might not still be with you at that point.
Right.
And then they're, then going past the newborn that comes immediately into care because they're born addicted, we're looking at kids that come into care at all different ages and levels. And so what has that from in utero to age whatever, what does that span of time look like? Why is this child in care? And contrary to popular belief, kids are not just pulled out of their families' homes and put into care willy-nilly. There's a lot more competency than that, and there's a lot more thought than that going into how kids are taken and put into care. There are support systems and structures that are put or attempted to be put in long before children are pulled, ideally, unless there's in a crisis situation. Right. So these kids may have been exposed to multiple traumas. We talk about trauma, and I think a lot of us think of a car accident being a trauma, and it is, but it's a singular trauma. When we look at PTSD in veterans, we're looking at ongoing trauma, which is why, veterans struggle so much who have been through this PTSD or who are going through the PTSD. They struggle so much with just being alive, with being around noises and stimulus and the sensory exposure and overexposure, because it triggers that trauma. And it's invisible to the rest of us. And our kids who have been through these traumatic experiences, multiple experiences, ongoing maybe every day of their life, potentially, that PTSD is just as is born into their brain, their neurology. It changes their neurological makeup. As it is for a soldier in a war. I mean, they are in a war zone a lot of times. And we
totally unprepared.
Totally unprepared, and when they need caretakers the most. So not only are they being traumatized and exposed to trauma on a regular basis, but we're looking at, people say, oh, but he came into your life when he was 7 months old. How could he still be struggling at whatever age he is now? Because at 7 months old, he needed us the most. He needed a caretaker. He needed to bond. He needed to form the attachment the most, and he didn't have that. So the structure of his brain changed. When he cried because he was hungry and nobody attended to that crying, he realized that crying no longer got him what he needed to stay alive. So it became about life and death. So he changed the structure of his brain. The neural pathway had to reroute itself to figure out how to get what he needed to stay alive. And you can't just unchange that neural pathway because now this child is in a loving, caring home. So we're looking at, the issues around foster care are so much bigger than just finding homes.
Yes.
We're looking at such complex issues around these kids who do need to grow up and be our future. And if you're thinking about, and now we can talk about numbers, 500,000 children across the United States at any given moment, those are the ones that are already in care, not counting the ones that are not in care or going through trauma. Kids that come in and out of care, they don't just take kids out of homes and then not return them. These are by right their parents, and they deserve the chance to get better. They deserve the chance to rehabilitate, and that those chances are given. The family structure is sacred. And I think we all, at the end of the day, I think we all feel that way. We wouldn't want somebody coming into our home and placing judgment or bias on us and the way we're bringing up our children, and then deciding that's it, you can never be this child's parent again.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to think about this whole picture with a lot of empathy on both sides. And that's something we try to do as a foster family. We try to do that with our own children. We try to remind our children why these kids are in care. Sometimes the behaviors are just so difficult to manage. And that's the moment where we do those reminders of remember why this child is not living with mom and dad right now. That we really need to be aware that there's a history here, that this is about fear, or this is about sadness, or this is about shame. This isn't just about acting out because they never learned discipline, which plays into it too, but it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, that's so much easier.
Yeah.
The discipline part is so much easier than all of the other. I know that in dealing with children who have sensory issues, they can appear to have their behavior, it's hard to know what is generating their behavior.
Correct.
You might get the same behavior, screaming, but it could be for a number of different reasons. And I know with the case in point of my own grandson, loud noises, which none of us ever even noticed.
Right.
Okay, would send him off the charts. And trying to figure, it took a while.
Right.
It took a while to figure out what he was trying to get across. And then everybody became more cognizant of the sounds.
Right.
And not taking him to places where those sounds were likely, or at least understanding what he was reacting to when he responded that way.
Right.
But it doesn't come with a manual that says if he cries, this is the reason. It could be A, B, C, D, and who knows what all.
Right. So I think the tired analogy that we all use is that, your grandson and a lot of the kids that I've cared for, they only have a tool or two in their toolbox. Yep. Crying is one of them.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that he's crying for the same reason every time.
Yep.
And I think that is one of the things about foster care that I'm sure several other foster parents keep coming back to as what excites us. It's figuring out what that tool is letting us know. It's figuring these kids out. You're sort of fighting for the 6-year-old to learn how to tie their shoes and ride a bike. At the same time, they may be acting like they're 18 months because that 18-month box is never filled up, or they might be acting like they're 18 because they were overexposed to things that they should have never been exposed to.
True.
And sometimes it's 18 months to 18.
Yeah.
So you're trying to help that child be on that proper, correct developmental track and teach them all those wonderful things that a 6-year-old should know. But you're doing that dual parenting of, at the same time, we need to also realize that they can't handle the things that a 6-year-old should typically be able to handle. And then just, backing down and figuring out the whys. And when we do figure out a why, it's just the most exciting part of our job. I mean,
it's like solving a mystery.
It really is, and it's hard fought. So when we figure it out, it's just absolutely the drug that keeps us coming back for more. It's exciting. It's fun. Yeah.
How many children have you fostered over the years?
You know what? I don't know.
Okay.
I never, it's funny.
Sat down and counted them.
I never counted them. I think I really didn't ever want it to be about numbers.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of long-term fostering and...
Long-term, explain long-term.
A long-term meaning they're with us for longer than a week or two.
Okay.
So long-term could be, for us, it could be 9 months, it could be a year and a half, could be 2 of our kids stayed, so they're here forever. We've had other kids where we've just taken them for a weekend, 3 days. When kids come into care, they go and they get a 72-hour hearing to make sure that this is a proper decision. So sometimes kids return after 72 hours, and you're just sort of the holding place, make sure that child has a soft place to land. So there's a wide myriad of reasons, causes, and then lengths of stay and care. But it's funny because we do have a foster parent appreciation dinner every year, and they often ask, raise your hand if you've fostered over 20 kids, and raise your hand if you've fostered over, and that kind of gives me the chills. Yeah, I don't really like that so much.
Yeah, I suppose to some degree, how is it relevant? I think for my own reason for asking the question, it's more in admiration for the thought that you could have so many children cycle through and on some level be able to maintain the norm with the rest of your family. I mean, this is the part that I myself find just so astonishing. I mean, you have to keep it, all those other 5 kids that are there all of the time, or whatever part of the time they've been in their lives, but especially Zach, as the oldest, who's been there for all of it.
Right.
What you had to do to keep him kind of on a steady state while interrupting with all of that during it. That's going to be an immense challenge. It's something I can tell you, I know myself well enough, I could not do. And I'm sure that others share that as they listen I would be overwhelmed. I would just be overwhelmed.
It can be overwhelming. I think my answer to that is, for us, we were struggling with some behaviors with one of our children, and not to overshare or call that child out, but we made a decision that this child needed some real work in understanding empathy. It was not hardwired into this child of ours, and we wanted to make sure that we found a way. So while we were discussing whether we would help that one little girl that kind of persuaded us, or the thought of her persuaded us to do the MAP training, we were also thinking this could really help our child understand that others have feelings outside of his own.
Yes.
So that was our biggest motivation for starting when we did, and has continued to be the motivation because it worked. It was a little experiment. We thought, what could go wrong? And, while we're doing this, we're actually helping somebody else's child along the way. So it's win-win for us. So I will very proudly say it has worked, and it has taught all of our kids, not just the one we are kind of aiming at, what empathy really looks like. Having the ability to share your parents with another child is, I don't think I could praise my children enough for the magnitude of that task and what we're asking them to do. And it's not always pretty, and it's not always graceful, but they get it done. And when new kids come into our home, it's sort of like, any parent will say, sometimes you just can't stand the argument of the moment, the argument that goes on for 3 weeks and they keep fighting about the same thing, or you keep getting stuck in the same place with your kids. When a new child comes into our home, it all changes. It changes the whole dynamic of my family, and everyone's eyes are on how can we help this child assimilate into our home, and how can we not throw a party that they're there, but acknowledge that they're there, there and help get them settled and help them find peace where they are and figure them out and share the child, because like I said, I'm sharing a lot with my kids, and also take care of each other through the process. And that's the beautiful piece of my children growing up through this, is that we have learned not only how to take care of each other through grief, but through celebration of those milestones that are so hard fought, and just making the decision about taking another child. And sometimes we get a call and it doesn't pan out, and you should see the deflation of my children. Like, we are on the way to the movies one day, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I tell them we're not going to the movies because this little baby needs a placement? Or these are the real moment decisions that we're up against. One of the babies we took happened to come the night of my oldest's very first varsity basketball game. Something he had waited for his entire life. And I'm now scrambling around knowing I need to get to this game, and a baby's coming straight out of the hospital with issues I can't describe, but yes, serious medical issues. Okay. And trauma, and where's my balancing act and all of that. And to cut to the chase, that became my son's college essay, something I never thought he'd write. And he wrote about, without any prompting, what it felt like to be on, the doorstep of the thing he's waited the longest for, and also of this baby coming into her life that ended up staying with us for almost a year and becoming as close to a sibling as possible without an adoption. And it's so yeah, it is a juggle. It's a big juggle. But now that they're older, especially, they take part in it. When they were younger, I just did a lot of sweating.
Yeah. And in those cases in which you've had a child for a year and a half, how do you say goodbye? I mean, that's got to be...
Gosh, I won't lie that sometimes it's harder than other times. Sometimes you have a kiddo that comes in your home that just isn't a good match, and you think every child deserves to be here. Every child deserves the love, support, attention, care that we can give them. But I, put my head on the pillow every night and go, oh my gosh, just one more day. It's hard. It's just really hard. And other times kids come into our home and they felt like or feel like they came from us, that there's no possible way they weren't ours to begin with. Keeping in mind that there's a family they belong to out there, always having like the two brains working at the same time, but emotionally, sentimentally, the feeling is they just were meant to be here. And those kids, one in particular, don't always stay. And in 10 years of doing it, we have gotten through all the goodbyes. Sometimes we have rituals. We take a lot of pictures. I busy myself with taking care of my kids through the process. That helps me get through the process. We make books for the children who are leaving. We write, user's manuals, for a lack of a better term, for what they like and don't like and how they like to be held and, what they're best at right in this moment and all those wonderful things you wish anyone would tell you about a child, because we never had that coming in.
I was going to say, do you get that kind of thing ever with any of them?
Not usually.
Yeah.
We usually get trash bags and kids, trash bags full of stuff and a kid in need. We don't generally get kids from other foster homes. This happened a couple of times, and in that case, we do get a little bit more information because it's, there's somebody there who's been getting to know that child for a period of time. So the goodbye, it's a range of emotions. There was one we said goodbye to a year ago that we're not over yet. But we have an ongoing relationship with that child, and that has been the silver lining that we all desperately needed. And we get to watch her grow up. And if we can't be in her life every day, then I am just eternally grateful for that. So, yeah, it's hard. There's nothing easy about this. I'd be sugarcoating it to say it was anything less than hard. But anything this hard is that worth it. And that's the way I look at it. So now you weren't recruited. I mean, you sort of self-recruited with your husband. But do you participate in programs that do outreach to people who are considering? I'm assuming people want to talk to someone who has experience before they jump in. Right. So I have that the luxury, the luck of being the ambassador, and so that is my job. So it's a volunteer position where I do outreach work and recruitment work, and I do the We've Got Your Backpack program, which I started because there are so many kids who have support but are still not in care yet, and there are so many kids who are just coming into care who have nothing. So you've got the two different kinds of kids, and so I can't even begin to tell you how many hundreds of kids benefit from these backpacks every year, and school supplies. A lot of times these kids are going to school with nothing, and when I started that, it was the process that went through my head was, and it always is, how do I let people know about foster kids and about foster care without just beating it into them? Because nobody will respond to that. That's not how I'm going to get attention for these kids. And so I've been trying to come up with ways to get support for these children, at the same time sort of raise this awareness, so the level of awareness in our community. I'm responsible for sort of looking after 26 towns and seeing what kind of information I can get out to the public about foster care. And it's a huge task because I'm asking people to do what I did, which I know is hard, and to change their life for other people's children. It is a life-changing involvement. The backpacks it's just the most wonderful way I have found to sort of nurture both needs. It's getting kids what they need. It's also giving people who can't open their homes to these kids an opportunity to help, which I think so many people really just want to do. It's like you said, it's not something you can see yourself doing, but you could see yourself maybe getting a backpack. And at the same time, I'm just so eternally grateful for all these hardworking families like mine. I know what it's like to get 5 kids to school. I know that my bank account is tight. I know that I dread going back to school shopping because the bills are adding up, and I don't know where I'm going to get the money for the next like back to school clothes shopping spree we have to go on, or the whatever it is coming after that, or the sports fees, and here are people who are willing to step up and donate. Even a box of pencils helps somebody who didn't have pencils. I mean, there literally is no donation too small. And at the same time, they're thinking about the child that might be receiving that donation. And maybe it starts a conversation somewhere. So my job is to plant seeds, and it might take them a decade to sprout. And sometimes that's for the best, because this is something you really want to think long-term about. It's not something you can just jump into and do well.
So you try to get, if I remember correctly, 1,500 backpacks?
No, but thank you. No,
okay.
More like 300 is my goal.
Okay.
Yeah, 200 to 300.
Okay, and you are just drawing from Holliston, or anybody anywhere?
Nope. So I have a 26-town catchment area. Holliston's my easiest to draw from because I know it so well. So I know where to go on Facebook to look for community support, and I know which local businesses will help me. So my dry run has been the last couple of years in Holliston. I have spread out to Hopkinton, and I've had a healthy amount of support in Sudbury this year. I've tried to tackle Ashland and Framingham, and I'm kind of falling flat because I haven't found the right inn yet. So, but we go all the way up to Littleton and Concord. Okay. So I'm looking for, I'm always looking for someone who runs a small business who could just be a collection point and maybe put a poster in their window or talk to the people who, solicit their business. I'm looking for individuals who want to do the same for me, and I've had a lot of support this year. It's my 4th year doing it, so every year it gets a little better. Sure. And then the backpacks come to me, and my children and I spend a good day, a solid day, laying it all out, and we have a list. We itemize everything, and we have a list that goes into each backpack. And we can't take money, but we can take gift cards. So sometimes someone will give me a Target or Staples gift card, and then, when I am missing 3 rulers and 4 binders, we make a run and we fill up the backpacks. And then we load up my card 2 or 3 times and make a run over and get them to social workers who can drop them off to the kids who need them the most. So we have an ongoing list. And this is something that kids get pulled into care all year long, and sometimes they need a backpack in the middle of the winter, and we have that, which is wonderful. There are other people who collect backpacks for the same cause, and it's not a competition. I think it's a beautiful thing, the more we can get. People have asked me why I don't just go to a big company and ask for 300 backpacks, and I'm like, because that's not what I'm doing. I really want to reach people. People thinking about other people is my mission, and then getting that donation in the process is just it's like a bonus.
Well, yeah, it's the bonus. It's the frosting on the cake, because really you're just trying to build a network.
Right.
You're building a network of people who care about a population of children that maybe doesn't normally get that.
Well, they are children, so they can't speak up for themselves like we're doing right now, and they get forgotten because there's so much confidentiality around their situation. Obviously, it's not something we can even talk that freely about. So we really need to lend a voice to this cause, because otherwise it just goes unnoticed. They either blend into the community, or assumptions are made about why they're coming to school looking certain ways, and a lot of times people don't stop and think beyond that first assumption.
Yep.
So hopefully, the more we talk about it, the more we build communities of support around these kids, the more people are thinking about it on a slightly different level. Or it just rings a bell, when they see or hear something. Maybe it rings a bell, and maybe they take action in a different way. Maybe it's a phone call they wouldn't have made before listening to this talk, or before thinking about, the backpack they bought for a child and imagining that child walking into school wearing their backpack.
Now, are there other foster children here in Holliston?
Not many. Okay. We have, to my knowledge, I think we have 4 open homes, maybe 5. Not too many foster homes. It's a small town, so it's not that unusual.
Okay.
But we're always looking for more.
Okay. Does your catchment area take you into Natick and those areas too?
Yep.
Okay. Do you find that bigger communities, just by virtue of their population, have more of them?
Yes.
More foster parents? Okay.
But they're never really enough, and I'll tell you why. The opioid crisis.
Oh, I can imagine.
Is bringing more and more and more and more kids into care quickly. So, and when I say crisis, I mean I'm working with people who are, veterans in this system, in this business of getting kids the help they need, and they're nervous about whether they're going to find homes, and more nervous than I think they've ever been in their career. And what happens is that parents OD, or they don't get better, and kids stay in care. And when kids stay in care, ultimately, ideally, they get adopted. So if you can imagine, and I'm going to make this simpler than it really is, but if you can imagine a child coming into my home in foster care, and then the parents' rights being terminated because either they're not with us anymore, or they just can't get better because this crisis is hitting people so hard, then that child stays in my home, and then maybe I adopt that child, and that means that one of my slots is now full. So, we can recruit and recruit and recruit new foster families, but slots are filling up faster and staying filled up because kids are staying in care rather than going home and getting reunified as often as they would have prior to this crisis. So it's changing the numbers game. And
that's a whole different dynamic. I've never heard that conversation at all about the whole. It's just sort of a branch off of the whole opioid crisis.
Right. Well, we're really just starting to talk about this crisis, and I don't think we've trickled down to all the people it's affecting. We're talking about the people it directly affects who are using these drugs, but I don't know. I really don't hear that conversation out in the media very often at all. What happens to these people's children? And, they end up in the system.
Yeah, indeed.
Or in the care of their families. I mean, that's obviously there's a huge community of people who are family members caring for children.
Grandparents caring for grandchildren and whatever. But, And anyway, to go back, let's just make sure that everybody in Holliston does understand how your backpack project works. If someone wanted to, based on today's conversation, provide you with a backpack, what would they do?
So they could either go right to Fisk's, and I like to promote small businesses who are helping me, so they could go right to Fisk's, and they actually are selling backpacks for the first time this year.
Oh, okay.
And have done really well with that, because several of the backpacks I've received have been bought right at Fisk's. They also we've got your backpack packs, so you can buy a pack. I think they're $10.99, right around there, and that pack goes right in a backpack. So it
contains the different pieces that they need: pencils, ruler, pen, whatever.
Right.
Okay.
I've also been posting all over the Holliston bulletin board. I'm Holliston Happy. My own Facebook page, Deborah Sweet. You can always private message me and ask for information. But if you looked, you would find the list of things I need. And I don't need a full backpack. I mean, that's a bonus. That's wonderful if I get that. But when I say you could donate a box of pencils, I really truly mean it. It will get used. So anywhere from a notebook to a box of pencils to a full backpack full of crayons and markers and pencils and binders. And it's common sense stuff. I tried to take the lists of the 26 towns we're working in and look at what the common denominators were in that list, and then just kind of make a general list, because you just never know where the backpack's going to end up. It will not fulfill every need this child has, but it'll certainly get them started. So Fisk's has a collection drop-off point in the back of, when you walk in the back, there's a box there. So if you purchase things elsewhere, they have been gracious enough to also accept items that were not purchased in their store, which is above and beyond. You can drop it off there. You can drop it off at the Prana Center. You can also drop it off in my front steps if you know where I live, or you want to private message me, I'll tell you. And then outside of Holliston, there are other collection points as well. So.
Does this go up through teen years? Do we have foster kids that we're working on that are
I have
teenagers?
kids in college.
Truly?
Not many, but some kids age out but are still being supported. So I have had a few kids in college. Those are the ones that tug at my heartstrings the most. When I think about getting my own child ready for college, and then I'm packing a backpack for somebody else who's doing it all by themselves, and they're actually at the point where they've gotten themselves there through whatever they've been through in life already, that stuff keeps me up all night. So we go from preschool all the way up to college. Generally, it varies a little each year, but generally I get a list of either first names and ages or just gender and age. And then I try to match the backpack to those qualifications the best I can. And for me, because I have a little OCD, it's like a painstaking process of, would a 5-year-old like My Little Pony, or would she like, it's just because I'm thinking, what would my own children, I put as much thought and care into delivering these as I would for my own children.
Sure. Wow, that's an ambitious undertaking, and you and your kids put all of these together and then truck them off. Well, that's great. So I hope that, at least as an outgrowth of this, that there's one thing, is maybe you can get a few more backpacks done for this year. What's your deadline?
I'm trying to get as many as I can by this coming Sunday.
Okay.
But I collect all the way through the end of September, and honestly, if you gave me something in December, I'd take it too. I take it all year, so if somebody...
Well, they're staples. I mean, they're not going to go bad.
They don't go bad. They live in my basement in bins. My only real qualifier is that it has to be new. For many reasons. People's gently used varies. So what my vision of that is not always somebody else's vision of that, and then I'm going through other people's visions of that, and it just creates more work for me. But the other is that these are kids that have maybe never had anything new.
Really.
And so this should be special. So,
I know. I mean,
set the bar high.
One of my granddaughters is already, let's go, I want to go get a backpack and that kind of thing. And I mean, it's part of her birthday and that kind of thing. But it's still a big deal to her to have a new backpack, and it's not that this kid is deprived in any way, shape, or form.
That's right.
But it's just, I remember getting my school shoes.
That's
what a big deal that was
to have
the new shoes without the creases in the toes. And walk around flat foot so you don't crease them, that kind of thing. But anyway.
It is a big deal. My high schooler still gets excited.
Sure. Why not?
And she just said how much she loves her backpack from last year. She's excited to start using it again. I mean, it is something that kids do get excited about.
Yeah, well, it's theirs. And at high school level anyway, they carry everything in it. I mean,
they do.
It's just it's them.
They do. And not to paint a negative picture in this, but just because it should be said as well, if a child has one of these backpacks and they need to come into foster care at some point in the next year, a lot of times that backpack is going to get filled with all those things they want to bring with them in a hurry. And so you have to think sometimes beyond just my whole thing being a teacher and a mom and a parent and just wanting kids to feel entitled to the education they're receiving and not walk in with shame right from the get-go. But beyond that, sometimes this is their everything. This is where they carry their life around.
Life in a bag.
Yeah. So it gives them the ability to do that if they need to. Ideally, they don't. Ideally, their situation stabilizes. And that could be a piece of it. If you have to choose between school supplies and dinner, you're going to choose dinner as a parent. So, the school supplies don't always get bought because they can't. So we're supplying that just take the stress off, the pressure off some of these families who are under so much pressure financially.
Of course, the ironic thing, too, is that when you think about it, the teachers are so often ones that are providing supplies into classrooms. I mean, it's just all so wacky.
It is.
You know, it's
It
just
is.
all so wacky
Yeah.
that it's a little bit disturbing. That, you know, but at any rate, I'm glad that you're doing that work
Thank you.
because I think that it is important, and I think you're right that these kids probably treasure that. I know, you know, so many of them carry all those little gizzy botches that they can hang on them and that kind of stuff, you know, those little treasures that they have. They get to be meaningful.
They absolutely do. And I don't ask for those things, but every
Right.
once in a while someone
Somebody will
sends
show
something
one.
along. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, do I love giving that one.
Yeah.
I don't get to see the kids get the backpacks. I mean,
Yeah.
this is all blind. This
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
it's not what it's about for me. But I will say that there was one particular day that I was doing a parental visit with one of my foster kids, and I was coming out of the office, and two little girls were walking out, crossing paths with me, and they had just because I packed the backpacks, and I remember them. They just received their backpacks, and they were skipping through the parking lot like they had won the lottery. It was Christmas, birthday, Hanukkah, whatever they celebrate, all wrapped up in one. And I'll never forget the image of them. Just the joy
Nice.
that they had. So I did get that little treat.
Yeah, a little Benny for you for all of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when's your breather over?
Well, he leaves in a week and a half. Probably after school starts, we'll revisit where we are with all of this. And, you know, like I said, we'll keep doing respite and trying to decide where my life starts kicking in again in terms of a career. And do I go back to teaching? Do I continue fostering? We've talked a lot about taking more medically involved kids. It's something that we have the ability to do, and we often get broken babies, but babies with broken bones. But
Is that what they...
yeah,
That's sad.
it is very sad.
Very sad.
It is. But we're looking at maybe more complex cases as well. So we're at the crossroads right now, trying to figure it all out. But we're always in the game.
Now, I first met you as an art teacher because I got your name from somebody
Yep.
and so forth, and my grandson took classes with you. But do you use the art in terms of dealing with the kids? I mean, do you find that as a therapeutic tool? I would think it would be.
It is incredibly therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
And that was another thing that I've been with the push of that friend you saw me with at Coffee Haven. Something I wanted to do when I was in college was art therapy, and there were only 6 programs in the country at the time.
Really?
And I didn't like any of the colleges that were providing that opportunity. So I chose art education, but it's always been something I've been interested in. My master's is special education. So we have that's my wheelhouse right there. So it's certainly something that is useful and beneficial for a lot of kids. I mean, not all kids respond to it, but yeah, you could, honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm living in a movie when I see some of the things that kids draw. It's just unbelievable.
Now, in terms of, are there different programs today? Is it possible? I mean,
Yes.
would seem to me that the industry, if you will, would have caught up
Absolutely.
by now. To say
The
that,
field has grown, and there is an art therapist working in Holliston, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, so it's out there.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Have we failed to cover something?
Yeah, I think you've got I wear it all on my sleeves, so I think you got the whole kit and caboodle.
You
My
do.
life story.
Yeah, but that's great. That's great, and it's good that you can talk about it so easily because it probably puts people at ease if they want to ask you something, and you seem to be very forthcoming. So
Thank
that
you.
would be, if I were interviewing you as a prospective foster mother, I would not come away with the idea that you were being glib about what this whole thing was.
Thank you.
That it's a very serious undertaking. You are taking a little person in your hands and accepting a burden for one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, whatever.
And just that unknown alone is half of the serious undertaking. Yeah.
Truly. Well, thank you for your work and for your husband's work, your children's work, because obviously it's been a family effort. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for coming and talking to me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for joining us. I think this was everything that I wanted it to be in terms of getting your message out. So, all right, folks, enjoy the rest of summer, and we'll be back soon. Thanks.